Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and to the Bookcase build series. In the previous episode, we picked out our wood, we built our blueprint kind of design, and we picked out our grain pattern and paired our boards together. In this episode, we're gonna work on laminating our paired pieces together to make our sides, our top, our shelves, etc. Stay tuned. So this is one of the sides that we picked out in the previous episode. We've got these marked down at the bottom there. I don't know if you can see that or not right here. I put some tape on them and marked them. I lettered each one, so this is D and D. This is gonna be one of the sides. So what we wanna do essentially is glue these two pieces together, but we wanna do it in a way where you don't really see a seam. In order to do that, we need to do a couple things. First, we need to make sure that these two sides, this side here and this side here, are completely parallel to one another. So that doesn't mean that it has to be parallel to this face. These faces, they just need to be parallel to each other. In an extreme case or extreme example, you could have this side on a 45-degree angle and this one on an opposing 45-degree angle. As long as they match well together and come together perfectly, that would be fine. Ideally, you want them to be at a 90-degree angle as close as you can. However, the main goal is to have these parallel to one another so that when they come together, they almost disappear and don't really make too much of a seam. So a couple things we're gonna need to do this. First, we need to cut these down to size. These are 6-foot boards. We want them to be 4-foot boards. You don't wanna be planing things that you don't need, right? You could also have twists and things like that in your board, so you want to minimize the amount of planing and things that you need to do to it. First thing we're going to do, we're going to measure 4 feet, we're going to cut these down. Then we're going to use a jack plane to plane these sides. Ideally, you would like to use the longest plane you have when you're jointing long boards like this together. So when you think of a board or an edge of a board like this side, you're thinking of it as a straight line, right? But in reality, it could be kind of like this, right? This is an extreme case, but that if you looked closely at this edge of wood, it could be doing some kind of waves like that. When you come in with your plane, we'll say this is our plane, right? When you come in with your plane and you're planing in this direction, what you're doing is you're not planing this entire length. You're just skimming off the tops of these kind of hills here, right? So you're coming in and you're skimming these off, and what you're doing each time, you'll hear when you start planing a really uneven piece of wood, you'll hear right? Until those strokes, each time you do it, you'll hear once you get that plane down flat. Now, the issue is these waves could be really long, right? And if you have, we'll say, a short plane, right? What that plane could be doing, like a number 2 or number 3, number 4, something like that, what that plane could be doing is just riding in and out of these valleys. All that's gonna do is keep that curve in, but it's gonna flatten out. It's just gonna smooth out your hills and your peaks, right? Your peaks and your valleys. So you want the longest plane possible so that it will span between these two hills as much as possible. So as you're going through your peaks, you're spanning these, bringing them down instead of riding in and out. There are ways to do it with small planes. If all you have is a number 4 smoothing plane, there are ways to do that. I'll try to show examples of that, but this is the general idea of what you're doing when you're planing something to be flat. So an example of a really short plane is this Harbor Freight piece of junk that we bought maybe a year ago, and we did a review on it. I would not recommend buying this, by the way, without just a ton of work. So this is a number 3. You can see this is really short, right? This is gonna be one of those things when you're trying to joint long boards, you're gonna have a problem with because it's gonna wanna ride in and out of those peaks and valleys. Now in comparison, here's a number 4. You could tell it's a little bit longer, right? So this number 4 would be a little bit better at jointing. However, it's still really short and it's still gonna probably follow some peaks and valleys. Like I said, there is ways to do it. You can recognize where the peaks are and just plane those specific areas until you get down smooth, but that's more of a visual, something with a flat edge that you're gonna have to work on. So if this is all you have, or if you're doing Harbor Freight stuff, this is all you have, you can do it. It's just gonna be a little bit different process. So for example, this is the number 4. This is now the number 5. So you can tell a lot longer sole. So this is a lot longer. It's going to span those peaks and valleys a little bit better. Now, this is not a jointing plane. It's a jack plane because it's kind of the jack of all trades. It's long enough to do jointing with, but it's short enough to, you can still use this as a smoother if you want to. If you're just getting into woodworking, you're becoming a beginner, I would highly recommend getting in number 5 first as your first plane. This is my record, my pre-war plane. It's in great shape, by the way. And this is what we're going to use. The reason we're using this and not a bigger plane is because I don't own a bigger plane. This is the longest plane I have. If somebody has an old number 7 or number 8 sitting around their house, an old jointer plane or those big long wood ones, and you don't want it, hit me up because I would love to have one. Back at the table here, we've got our 2 pieces kind of butted up against each other down there, so they're flush on one end down here. They're actually flush on both sides. You do tend to get a little better quality with your cuts when you buy select pine from the store, but it's still, even when you put it together, I've still got some gaps here and there that I want to get rid of. I've got these together. If you remember our plan, we had the sides set out to be 4 feet tall. We don't need exactly 4 feet, but I'm still going to cut to 4 feet just to have a nice measurement, and then we can adjust because I'm not sure if these sides down here, these ends from the store, are going to be square. So I want to have a little bit of wiggle room here and there to be able to straighten out these sides once we get them paneled up and we go to square them up. I want to be able to, as well as our cut might not be straight. So I want to be able to square these up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, just measuring tape, and I'm going to put a mark at 4 feet. So that gives us 3/4 of an inch of wiggle room. If you aren't very confident in your sawing or anything like that, maybe give yourself a little bit more room. But just remember, the more room you give yourself, the more you're going to have to kind of plane that off or trim that up later. Again, these aren't finalized because we don't have anything done yet, but these are fairly square coming off the bench. So we're going to square it up after the fact. But right now we're just kind of giving ourselves an initial reference line across here so that we cut square. We've got a reference to cut on the top. And let's get this guy cut. So we're cutting across the grain in this case. So this is a cross cut. We're going to use a cross cut saw. Again, if you're beginning at this stuff, a rip cut is when you're cutting in the same direction that you see those grain lines going. A cross cut is when you're cutting across them. 2 different saws for those types of work. In this case, we're using a cross cut. I'm going to put my thumb on the top here and kind of bend it forward and use my knuckle as a kind of a guide to rest my saw up against to help that first initial cut. I'm cutting on the scrap side of the line and cutting as close as I can to it. If you want to, you can cut a little further away. It's your choice, whatever you're comfortable with. So position the wood the best you can. I've got mine in the vise. If you hopefully have a workbench, if not, you can use holdfasts or clamps to clamp it down to a work surface. Even one of those like workbench, work buddy type things. Whatever you have, just secure your piece as best you can so that you can work on it. Again, I've got my thumb here, knuckle as a guide. And then what I'm doing is I'm starting to cut on this corner here so that I can see 2 lines of reference, this one and this one. That's going to help me guide my saw to be a straight cut. I'm going to pull back a couple times to kind of get that cut going. Oop. And then watching both lines. I'm watching both lines to make sure that I'm on my line and I'm cutting the direction I want to cut. So I'm not forcing down on the saw. I'm just kind of letting it sit here, right? I've got 3 fingers in and 1 finger on the saw pointing forward. That's going to help with alignment. My left foot is forward, my right foot is behind it, squared to 90 degrees to the board, or my front leg, and my arm is just, all I'm doing is just moving my arm, not moving the whole body or anything like that, just my arm. And I'm just letting the saw, the weight of the saw, do the cut. Now, once I've established a good cut and I'm going in line, I can start to bring my saw up a little bit if I want to. And again, it's not a race. I'm not rushing to cut this through. I'm just taking my time and letting the saw do its work. And when I get down to the end of my cut, I'm grabbing this side of the board to support it because we don't want tear out. Then I'm going back on an angle and I'm just really slowly, lightly cutting. You'll hear the tone change. That means you're almost there. Don't press, just gentle. Gentle cuts, and that gives a nice clean cut. And you'll see we have a nice, straight, smooth cut now with no tear out on our end. If you get to the end and you're really cranking down, you risk breaking this off, and now you've got a big chunk missing out of your wood. Back to our boards now. I've got the two boards laid out. I really like this position when these two boards are together. I don't like this position as much. It looks good, but I think this side, when positioned like this, looks better. So to make sure that I don't screw these two up, and these are the two sides I want to plane or joint, I'm just going to draw a triangle. That way, these can only come together in this manner when we come back to glue them up, and that reminds us of what sides we're going to be planing or jointing. If you notice, I push these two together, you can see a visible line here. It kind of disappears here a little bit, but then opens back up down here. That's that waviness we're talking about. So we want to come through on these sides with the plane and smooth these out, and then make sure that they're jointed to one another so that they come together with no line. We've got our bottom board here. You can see the bottom of the triangle. We're going to put this in the vise now and plane this top edge so that we can joint the two pieces together. So what I'm looking for is grain direction here. The grain appears to be coming up. Sometimes it's hard to tell. It appears to be going up, so I want to plane in this direction, not against it. Going against the grain, you're going to get tear out. So I'm going to put this in the vise this way so that I can plane in that direction and it'll smooth out. Now, depending on the length of your bookcase, this 4 foot might be a little bit much down on these ends when you're planing down. You want to have it put in a vise, but if you need extra support, try to clamp this side to your bench or workpiece or whatever you're working on so that these are really stable when you're planing on top. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to grab my number 5 and I'm going to back the blade off as much as I can and take an initial push. You'll hear nothing's cutting, right? Now I'm going to advance the blade just a little bit more, and now I can feel that blade engaging. So if you just heard there, the blade cut here and cut at this side of the board, but nothing here. We were wide open. So let's hear that again. Cutting, nothing, cutting again. What that means is this board has a big belly in it, right around this area. So these sides are high, and this side's high, this side's low. What we want to do is take these sides down until we get down flat with that. If you have something long and flat, in this case, maybe this level might be enough. So what I'll do is I'll take a flat piece and then take a flashlight, put it behind it, and follow it along. And right here, I can see light starting to show. Light starting to show, light showing there, and then once I get down here, I'm not seeing any light anymore. If we know this is our flat surface to reference off of, we've got this low spot in here, high spots here. We're just going to keep trying to plane this side and this side off until we can get that down to a smooth level. Because our plane is shorter than the gap, right? It starts here, ends down here. We could have that issue we talked about in the beginning where the plane just starts riding that out. And all you're going to do is just keep that belly in the wood. So what we're gonna do is plane this side and this side to bring those down a little bit. So we'll do 4 or 5 cuts down there. We'll do a few passes down here. And now we'll try again to go down the full length. Getting better. So if you heard that last pass, right in here, it's just a little bit shallow there. I'm making a full cut all the way down, except right here I slipped it away. Another pass. That one is sounding really good, almost there. So that is looking pretty good. If you go a little slower, I've got 3 fingers on my tote and 1 just on the edge of the blade here. I'm pressing the plane up against the board, and then I'm grabbing the front of the tote and I'm running the board along my index finger knuckle here. And that's making sure that we keep it straight and I'm staying in the same part of the blade. And then I'm pushing slow. There's a little light spot. Back to a full width. If we unfurl our shaving there, we've got a nice consistent cut all the way down. Nice, perfect wide cut all the way across. That is looking really, really good. We now have this flat edge, but I don't know if it's really 90 degrees to this. Like I said earlier, not that important. You want it just parallel to the other board, but we're still gonna make sure that we're not that far out of whack. And throwing this square on this side of the board. Wow, okay. So we are dead square to this face, unintentional. So my battery died between the last one, but these are our 2 boards now. The triangle's on the other side in this direction, but I wanna go with the grain while I'm planing. So unfortunately that triangle's behind you, but picture a triangle here. So basically what I did to join these boards together is I used, just like we jointed the first top when we were planing the first board, we used, just like on the first time we planed the one board, we used our level as a guide, right? To make sure there was no light coming through. That's all we're gonna do with our other board. We're gonna set the board on top of it. We're gonna put a light behind it and make sure that there's no visible light. And if we do see any light in those spots, that means the sides on each side of the light are high. We need to plane those down. So basically we'll just take this top board off. If we were to see light maybe here and here, we would come through and take a stroke in the middle. So in our case, let's do that. I've got the board sitting here. I've got it flush up to the front and flush to the side where I'm going to glue it, right? Double check that, yep. Get our flashlight out and then check behind. I've got just a little sliver of light there, nothing here, and just a sliver of light on the end there. So basically what that means is I've got a big belly on this, but not huge. It's just a sliver. So basically maybe 1 or 2 passes starting from this side here, because this is where about the light stopped, and it picked up around here. And do a pass. One. Rinse and repeat essentially until you get no light or so minimal light that you don't really care because it will close up and clamp. So we now have our 2 boards jointed to each other. Could this board have a little curve in it? Sure. But if this one has a little curve, this one has a concave in it, right? Versus the curve. So they joint together seamlessly. That's all you're really looking for. Ideally, would you like to be 90 degrees? Sure. But as long as these 2 are together, they could have the biggest curve in them. As long as those 2 curves meet each other and they joint up tightly, where there's no visible gaps when they come together, you're good. You've jointed those two boards together. We've got these jointed to each other. Now let's get them in some glue and make them one board. So what I've done here is dry fit my two boards together. So it's kind of like a rehearsal for the big performance, right? Your glue up is the big show. You got to make sure everything looks good before you do it. You practice beforehand. So what I've done, I've laid out my 5 clamps here, got them all in a row, and went through and clamped everything together to make sure any gaps or visible gaps close up nicely. The boards are pretty much flush to one another, that they'll sit nicely. I've got some highs, some lows, but that's just the undulation from coming off the sander. They don't make these things dead flat. So you want them as close as you can. If you have to, you can put clamps on the ends down here or down here to like close them together. In our case down here, we may have an issue down here when we get to glue up. So I'm already ready for that. I know that I might need to put a clamp on that end. I've got all of our clamps lined up and we're in the clamps so that we don't have to be fiddling with adjusting or anything. We're good to go. Our triangle's in place and I think the grain looks pretty good. We've got our boards ready to go. I'm just going to take our glue and just zigzag down, holding your board on one side just for support. And come down the other side. So the glue I'm using is Titebond 2. Titebond comes in a bunch of different, or 3 types. The first one I have never really used. One. I always use Titebond 2. Titebond 3 is more for like waterproof applications, outdoor things. So we're going to use the patented finger spreading technique and try to ensure that we have glue coverage all the way up and down our board. We are good to go. We've got glue all the way around. Let's flip our board down, make sure our triangle lines up, and then down here making sure that we are flush with the side. And then I'm going to put our first clamp on down on this side. So I'm bringing this up to ensure that the boards are flush with one another, at least on this side. This is going to be our show side, meaning the side facing out. So I'm just coming in here and putting a little bit of clamping pressure, not a whole lot to start, so that way I can still kind of move, finesse some things around a little bit if need be. You also want to make sure that your clamp pads are perpendicular to the board, that are parallel. Yeah, the pads of the things are parallel to the edge of the board. You don't want them canted a little bit. If you have them canted like F clamps and things, you can cant a little bit and those pads will move a little bit. You're going to be clamping diagonal pressure in and could be twisting the wood as it dries, things like that. Looking for that good glue squeeze out, putting a little bit more pressure now on this side, making sure we're still flush here. You can see the glue squeezing out all the way down. We're still nice and flush here. And now we can start coming through these middles and putting just a little bit of pressure on that as well. Don't need a ton. You can already see the pressure squeezing out. So what we do want to make sure though is that we're flush. And I can feel a little lip here. I come in with my hammer. I'm going to support the bottom. Give that a little love tap. Now giving that a little pressure. We're good there. And down over here, checking our flushness. Yep, we're good. And good there. That little love tap is all we needed. We're flush there, we're flush there, flush, flush. Got a gap here. That was our worry spot, right? And we'll basically just put a little bit of pressure here, and that moves it right down in line, nice and tight. So now we can come back through, snug the rest of our clamps down, making sure we're snug. We don't have to really crank down on these, just enough to keep that good pressure all the way through. So now I'm just going to run through with a rag, try to get some of this glue up, even though we're going to plane it. The least amount of glue you have to clean up later, the better, in my opinion. We're gonna leave our new glued up panel and clamps overnight. Probably doesn't need to be that long, but at least a couple hours. You wanna keep it clamped up while that glue really sets up and cures up. So we're gonna keep those in clamps, make sure that it stays nice and glued up. It's warm in here today, so that glue should cure up no problem. If you're in a garage that's just freezing cold, try to keep it warm, or if you can, bring it in the house or something like that, just keep it warm so that the glue doesn't freeze. If you're somewhere in Michigan like me right now, you don't want the glue to freeze, you want it to cure. That's how you take two pieces of wood and join them together into making a laminated panel. You can make 3 pieces of wood, 4 pieces of wood. This concept goes with anything to make a big panel of wood out of many small pieces, right? So that's it for today on this video. I'm going to go ahead and do this same thing to the other side, our top, and all of our shelves. I'm gonna get those all paneled up. And the next time we come back, we'll start laying out our dados and learn how to cut those dados into the sides so that they can accept our shelving. And that's how we're gonna start building out our bookcase. If you're new to the channel, check out the previous video ahead of this on how we set up or picked our wood, how we picked our grain direction. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know down below in the comments. Look forward to the next video where we cut dados in this bookcase building series. Don't forget to click the bell so that you don't miss the next video that comes out on this bookcase build in this series. And let me know in the comments down below if you're liking this series or not. Do all the things down below. Give me a thumbs up, comment, all that fun stuff, and I will see you on the next one.